Ah, travelers of time, draw near, come closer. Let this old storyteller guide you through the golden sands of ancient Egypt, where pharaohs were not merely kings, but living gods who walked among mortals. The legends speak of a man, a ruler whose shadow stretched for 66 years along the banks of the Nile. A warrior who faced colossal armies, thousands of chariots gleaming beneath the merciless desert sun. A builder whose works defy time itself, rising majestically to this day, as though mocking the very idea of death. But who was this man? This man who dared to carve his name more deeply into stone than any pharaoh before or after him. What secrets dwelled in the heart of the one the Egyptians called, simply, the Great? Some say he alone saved an empire on the brink of collapse. Others whisper that his ambition was as vast as the desert itself. But the truth, my friends, the truth is always more fascinating than any myth. Prepare yourselves. Today, we lift the veil on the mysteries of Ramses II, the pharaoh who defied empires, raised eternal monuments, and shaped the destiny of an entire civilization. A story of glory, war, love, and immortality. The journey begins now. The prince forged in battle. But before we meet the lion, we must first understand the cub. The year was 1303 before Christ. On the fertile banks of the Nile, beneath the blazing heat of Egypt, a child was born who would bend the course of history. His name? Ramses. But this would be no ordinary prince. Oh no. This boy carried the blood of conquerors in his veins. His grandfather, Ramses I, had been a simple vizier. Imagine that. A man who rose to the throne not by divine birth, but through sheer military competence. His father, Seti I, was a fierce warrior reclaiming lands lost during the chaotic reign of the heretic Pharaoh Akhenaten. The 19th dynasty was young, fragile, and desperate to prove its worth. But here is something few will tell you. Ramses grew up in a time of deep insecurity. Egypt had been invaded by the Hyksos only a few generations earlier, foreign rulers from Asia who humiliated the empire for more than a century. Can you imagine it? The wound of that occupation still echoed in Egyptian memory. Seti I was not merely reclaiming territory. He was building a psychological wall, a belt of vassal states to ensure that Egypt would never again be invaded. And here is where the story becomes truly remarkable, my friends. At just 14 years of age, when most youths are still learning how to hold a sword, Ramses was appointed co-regent alongside his father. 14. Think of the weight upon those young shoulders. He was not playing at being a prince in golden halls. He marched with the armies. Records show that the young Ramses rode alongside Seti I in campaigns across Libya, Nubia, and Canaan. He saw blood. He breathed the bitter air of battle. He heard the cries of enemies falling beneath the wheels of Egyptian chariots. This was no pampered boy. This was a warrior being forged in the fire of war. But while the young prince mastered the arts of war, something far gentler blossomed in his heart. Her name was Nefertari, the one for whom the sun shines, as Ramses himself lovingly called her. He married her while still young, and unlike most royal marriages, which were little more than political arrangements, this one was different. Nefertari would not be just another wife. She would be his queen, his counselor, his partner in the delicate dance of diplomacy with the feared Hittites. But I wonder, what did the young Ramses think when he looked to the north, toward the Hittites, that brutal empire from Anatolia that had crushed the kingdom of Mitanni and seized Egyptian territories for itself? Did he already dream of glory? Was he already planning his response? Because, my friends, there was a city called Kadesh, a strategic fortress in Syria that the Hittites had torn from Egypt's grasp. Seti I had tried to reclaim it. He failed. Kadesh remained Hittite. And when Seti I finally closed his eyes in 1279 before Christ, placing the golden scepter into his son's hands, a question lingered in the palace air like smoke. What will this young pharaoh of 24 years do with the greatest army Egypt has ever assembled? The answer would come sooner than anyone expected. But before his great conquests, Ramses needed to make a statement to the world. And he did so magnificently. He did not simply take the throne, he built a new capital. Pyrames, the house of Ramses, rose in the eastern Nile delta, perfectly positioned to launch military campaigns into Asia. A city that dared to rival the glory of Thebes. Imagine the audacity, a pharaoh barely past his early 20s, declaring to the entire world, "This is my era." And then came his first real test. Pirates. The dreaded Shirden, warriors perhaps from Sardinia, perhaps from Anatolia, were terrorizing the Mediterranean coast, plundering Egyptian merchant ships. Trade was in danger. The economy was bleeding. What did the young pharaoh do? He set a trap. He placed merchant ships loaded with gold along known routes. And when the pirates took the bait, they found themselves surrounded by an Egyptian war fleet. Brilliant, wouldn't you say? The Shirden were captured, but here lies the stroke of genius. Instead of executing them, Ramses transformed them into his personal guard, turning enemies into allies. What a lesson in strategy! What a lesson in power! But all of this was only the opening act. The stage was set. The players, in position. And to the north, beyond the sands of Syria, a Hittite king named Muwatalli II was assembling the greatest army his empire had ever seen. The storm was approaching. And at its center, a young pharaoh with steady eyes and something to prove. To his dynasty. To his people. To the gods themselves. The greatest chariot battle of the ancient world was about to begin. The lions roar at Kadesh. It was the 5th year of the reign of Ramses II. The year was 1274 before Christ. And upon the scorching sands of Syria, two titans prepared for a clash that would echo across thousands of years. On one side, the young pharaoh Ramses, approximately 25 years of age, leading 20,000 Egyptian soldiers divided into 4 divisions: Amun, Ra, Ta, and Seth, each named in honor of the gods believed to march alongside their warriors. 2,000 chariots gleamed beneath the sun, light and swift like falcons poised to strike. On the other side, Muwatalli II, king of the Hittites, commanding a coalition of 18 allied kingdoms and vassal states. Warriors from Ugarit, from Carchemish, from distant Arzawa along the Aegean coast. An army estimated at 15,000 infantry and, pay close attention now, approximately 5,000 war chariots, each crewed by 3 men. Nearly double the Egyptian chariot force. But here is something most people do not realize. Hittite chariots were entirely different from Egyptian ones. Egyptian chariots were light, swift, crewed by 2 men, designed to fire arrows at full speed, like archers mounted on wheels. Hittite chariots were heavy, brutal, crewed by 3 men, armed with long spears built to crush infantry through sheer force. Speed against power. Agility against impact. And the city at stake? Kadesh. Situated along the banks of the Orontes River, in what we now call Syria. A strategic jewel controlling vital trade routes. The ultimate prize. But let me tell you what truly happened on that fateful day. It was the 9th day of the 3rd month of summer. Late May, most likely. Ramses marched confidently with his vanguard division, Amun, along the eastern bank of the Orontes. The division of Ra followed about half a day's march behind. Ta and Seth, even farther still. And then, fate intervened. Cruelly, Egyptian soldiers captured 2 Shesu Bedouins wandering suspiciously near the camp. When interrogated, and I imagine, my friends, that the interrogation was not gentle, they revealed wonderful news. The Hittite king is in the land of Kalab, far to the north of Tunip. Muwatalli was days away. Kadesh was undefended. Ramses had arrived first. The young pharaoh must have smiled. Victory seemed certain. He ordered the Amun division to make camp near Kadesh, shields forming a defensive perimeter, the royal tent at the center, a sanctuary to Amun beside it. But do you know what happened next? Those Bedouins were Hittite spies. A perfect trap. Because at that very moment, Egyptian scouts captured 2 other men, and these men, when pressed, confessed the terrifying truth. The Hittite army is hidden behind the hill of Old Kadesh, with infantry, chariots, and weapons of war more numerous than the sand of the river. Imagine the cold fear gripping Ramses. His army was divided. The division of Ra was marching unprotected to the south. Ta and Seth were still far behind. And the enemy was right there, only a few kilometers away, waiting for the perfect moment. And that moment had already arrived. as the division of Ra was crossing the Orontes, unaware. Perhaps even singing songs of imminent victory. 500 Hittite chariots burst from behind the hill of Kadesh like a storm of bronze and wood. They crossed the river and struck directly at the right flank of the Egyptian column. The destruction was immediate. The Egyptian cavalry protecting the flank was swept away. The infantry, unable to form battle lines, collapsed. Men ran in all directions. The Hittite chariots tore through the division of Ra like a spear through linen. But instead of stopping to completely finish the Egyptians, which they certainly could have done, the Hittite chariots continued their charge, straight toward Ramses' camp. And here, my friends, begins the moment Ramses carved into the walls of every temple he built. The Hittite chariots smashed through the shield wall on the western side of the camp. Absolute chaos. Egyptian soldiers running, screaming, falling. The royal family being hastily evacuated. But then, Ramses II, clad in his scale armor and his blue war crown, mounted his royal chariot, drawn by his 2 personal horses, Victory in Thebes and Beloved of Ammon, and gathered all the chariot warriors who still stood. And what did this young pharaoh do, surrounded by thousands of enemies? He counterattacked. In the words carved into his own mortuary temple, His Majesty entered the enemy army of Hatti, His Majesty being like Seth in his great strength, and like Sekhmet in the moment of her fury. His light chariots circled the disorganized Hittites, pouring arrows from every direction. The Hittite warriors, who had stopped to plunder the Egyptian camp, the fatal error of greed, were caught completely off guard. The Egyptian infantry, seeing their pharaoh fight with what seemed like divine fury, regrouped. They began pulling Hittite warriors from their chariots and cutting them down with the curved blades of the Kopesh swords. The Hittite momentum was broken. But Mu'attali, watching from his position near Kadesh, was not finished. He sent his elite chariot forces, his finest warriors, his royal vassals, in a second assault against the eastern side of the Egyptian camp. And it was in that moment of absolute desperation that salvation arrived. The Nueran division, a 5th contingent of foreign mercenaries that Ramses had summoned, appeared as if sent by the gods themselves. They shattered the second Hittite attack before it could penetrate the camp. As Ramses himself ordered recorded, the Nueran broke the army of the fallen Hittite king as they entered the camp of the pharaoh, and the servants of his majesty slew them. Mu'attali withdrew, his chariots shattered, his men drowning in the Orontes as they tried to escape. His losses, devastating. But, and here is the truth Ramses never carved in stone. The following day, when the division of Ta finally arrived along with the ashamed survivors of Ra and Amun, Ramses did something terrible and calculated. He publicly executed every soldier who had fled during the battle, in full view of Mu'attali. A warning, a display of power, a declaration, I am still strong. Mu'attali, shaken and with his forces severely damaged, proposed a truce. Ramses, who had also suffered serious losses, accepted. But here is what the Egyptian texts never admit. Ramses withdrew to Egypt. Kadesh remained in Hittite hands. The territory of Yup was occupied by Mu'attali. And worse, the apparent Egyptian weakness triggered massive revolts in Canaan. Vassal states turned their backs on the pharaoh. It was a strategic defeat, disguised as a tactical triumph. But Ramses was a master of what we would today call narrative. He transformed his miraculous survival into divine legend. The walls of Abu Simbel, the Ramesseum, Luxor, all proclaim the same truth. Ramses, the living god, alone saved Egypt. And here is what is fascinating. He was not entirely wrong. His personal courage genuinely turned the tide of the battle. Without his desperate counterattack, Egypt might have suffered a crushing and total defeat. But the war was not over. For the next 16 years, Ramses fought campaign after campaign, reclaiming territory, crushing rebellions, proving his worth again and again. And finally, in 1258 before Christ, something extraordinary happened. Ramses II and the new Hittite king, Hattusili III, signed the first documented peace treaty in all of human history. 2 identical texts, one in Egyptian hieroglyphs, one in Hittite cuneiform, establishing eternal peace between the 2 empires. Mutual military assistance, political extradition, mutual respect, and to seal the agreement, Ramses married Nefertari, the Hittite princess, daughter of Hattusili himself. She arrived in Egypt with a grand royal escort, and Ramses received her with full honors. Think about that. Two empires that had tried to destroy one another, now allies. And that peace would endure until the very collapse of the Bronze Age. But Ramses was not satisfied with treaties and diplomatic marriages alone. He had far greater plans. Because if there was one thing Ramses II understood perfectly, it was this: stone outlasts papyrus. Monuments outlive memory. And if he truly wished to be immortal, he would need to build as no pharaoh had ever built before. And that is exactly what he did. The builder of eternity and the twilight of the God King. The ancient scribes say that when the gods created Ramses II, they gave him more than the strength of a warrior or the cunning of a diplomat. They gave him something far more powerful: an obsession with eternity. And how does one achieve eternity, you ask? Ah, my friends, by building so grandly, so monumentally, that time itself would not dare erase your name. After the peace treaty with the Hittites, Ramses finally had what every great builder needs: time and resources. Trade routes flowed freely. Nubian gold poured into the coffers of Ramesseum. And the pharaoh had plans. Vast, ambitious, relentless plans. But here is something most people overlook. Ramses was not simply building temples. He was rewriting history. There was a practice, let us call it creative appropriation, in which Ramses ordered the inscriptions of previous pharaohs to be erased and replaced with his own name. Statues of Amenhotep III? Now they were Ramses. Monuments of other rulers? Ramses restored them, carving his own cartouche over theirs. But he was clever. Very clever. Concerned that future pharaohs might do the same to his own works, he ordered his hieroglyphs to be carved much deeper into the stone than was customary. Impossible to erase. Resistant to centuries of wind and sand. And then the true spectacle began. At Abu Simbel, deep in Nubia, Ramses ordered the construction of something that defies imagination. 2 entire temples carved directly into the living rock of a cliff. The Great Temple, dedicated naturally to Ramses himself as a living god, took 20 years to complete. 4 colossal statues of Ramses seated guard its entrance, each over 20 meters in height. 20 meters of solid stone, shaped with mathematical precision. And here lies a stroke of absolute genius. The temple was aligned so precisely that twice a year, on the 22nd of February and the 22nd of October, the rays of the rising sun travel 65 meters into the temple and illuminate the statues in the inner sanctuary. Ramses, seated beside Amun-Ra, Ra-Horekti, and Ptah, bathed in light. A spectacle of divine connection. Proof, carved in stone, that this man stood between the human world and the heavens. But there is more. The second temple, the small temple, was dedicated to his beloved Nefertari and to the goddess Hathor. And here, Ramses did something unprecedented in Egyptian history. He carved statues of Nefertari exactly the same height as his own. In a society where the size of a statue reflected importance, this was nothing short of revolutionary. A declaration of love, carved in stone, for eternity. The inscription simply reads, "The one for whom the sun shines." Even after her death, which came around 1255 before Christ, Ramses continued to honor her memory. He built for her one of the most magnificently decorated tombs in the Valley of the Queens. The murals inside Nefertari's tomb are considered among the greatest masterpieces of Egyptian art ever created. But Nefertari was not his only wife. Oh no! Ramses had multiple principal wives and dozens of concubines throughout his life. And more than 100 children. 100! It was a deliberate strategy, spreading his lineage across the empire, ensuring loyalty through family bonds. His second most important queen was Isetnofret, mother of many of his children, including Merneptah, the one who would eventually inherit the throne after surviving 12 older brothers. And here is a remarkable detail. One of his sons, Prince Kamwaset, became fascinated with history and ancient monuments. He carried out what we would today recognize as archaeological restorations of ancient structures, earning the title of the world's first Egyptologist. A prince of ancient Egypt, carefully restoring pyramids that were already more than 1,000 years old in his own time. But let us return to the monuments. The Ramesseum, Ramses' mortuary temple on the west bank of Thebes, was so immense that even its ruins are breathtaking. A colossal statue of Ramses there stood nearly 17 meters tall and weighed more than 1,000 tons. Today it lies in fragments. But the English poet Percy Bysshe Shelley immortalized it in his poem Ozymandias, the Greek name for Ramses, with the words carved upon the pedestal. "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." The irony of time. At Karnak, the most sacred temple complex in all of Egypt, Ramses added the magnificent hypostyle hall, a forest of 134 enormous columns, some over 20 meters high. To walk among them is to stand inside a cathedral built by giants. And his capital, Pyramus? It grew to house more than 300,000 people. A Bronze Age metropolis. Palaces, military arsenals, chariot workshops, temples to every god of the Egyptian world. Ramses was flooding Egypt with his own image. But even gods do not live forever. As the years passed, Ramses' body began to betray his unbreakable will. At 54 years of age, he celebrated his first Sed festival, a ritual of pharaonic renewal, traditionally held after 30 years of reign. After the first, it was celebrated on average every 2 years, though it varied greatly from pharaoh to pharaoh. But Ramses did not stop at one. He celebrated 14 Sed festivals throughout his life, a record that remains unmatched in history. As if he were daring death itself to come and claim him. He suffered from severe arthritis that bent his spine. His teeth were destroyed by cavities and abscesses. Imagine the constant pain. His arteries had hardened with age. And still he ruled. He outlived most of his own children. 12 designated heirs died before him. Can you imagine that pain? Watching son after son being taken to the embalmer while you, the father, remained seated upon the throne? And finally, in 1213 before Christ, after 66 years on the throne, the second longest reign in Egyptian history, Ramses II, at approximately 90 years of age, closed his eyes for the last time. Egypt entered national mourning. The man who had been pharaoh for longer than most Egyptians had been alive was gone. For many of his subjects, Ramses had simply always been there. They had never known another ruler. He was mummified with the greatest care and buried in the Valley of the Kings, in a tomb known as the 7th Royal Vault, one of the largest in the valley, with multiple chambers and corridors, filled with treasures and offerings for his journey into the next world. But here is a darker detail. Like so many tombs in the Valley of the Kings, Ramses' tomb was looted by grave robbers in antiquity. His treasure, stolen. His eternal rest, violated. And yet something extraordinary happened. Priests of the 21st dynasty, alarmed by the continuous desecrations, quietly removed Ramses' mummy from his tomb and hid it in a secret cache at Deir el-Bahari, along with the mummies of other great pharaohs, including Seti I and Thutmose III. There they remained, in silence and secrecy, for nearly 3,000 years. Until 1881, when archaeologists discovered the cache. And when Ramses' mummy was finally unwrapped and examined, scientists were astonished. Even after 3 millennia, his face was recognizable. Reddish-gray hair still covered his skull. His nose, prominent and strong. His jaw firm. And here is perhaps the most refined detail of all. In 1974, when the mummy began to deteriorate due to a fungal infection, it was transported to Paris for treatment. And when it arrived, an Egyptian passport was issued, with the occupation listed simply as King, Deceased. And when it landed at the French airport, it was received with full military honors, reserved for a visiting head of state. Even in death, Ramses still commanded respect. Today, his mummy rests in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization in Cairo, where millions of visitors come face to face with the man who built empires, fought epic battles, and achieved immortality through stone. And do you know something? He succeeded. Because here we are, more than 3,200 years later, still speaking his name. Still marveling at his temples. Still studying what he built and what he accomplished. Ramses II is not merely a mummy in a museum. He is a true legend. The pharaoh who defied time itself. And won. What do we learn from Ramses? Legacy is a choice. He turned defeat into glory, ruled for 66 years with unbreakable will, and loved deeply, carving that love into stone for eternity. True immortality is not perfect victory, but unforgettable action. Now, a confession. There is much left untold: the Exodus, the controversies, the theories that still divide scholars. We chose the forgotten details, buried beneath the familiar stories. If you learned something new, then this storyteller has done his part. Leave a sign you were here, a like, a subscription. Small gestures keep the fire alive. Nothing lasts forever, but everything can be remembered. And perhaps we will return, deeper, into the shadows Ramses tried to hide. His story is vast. There is more to uncover. Remember, like him, we all leave a mark. Not in stone, but in people. That is enough. Until the next adventure.